Oh, you play also a very important role in preserving, let's say, your forests. You have a young population, you have a relatively well-educated population. You can use the fourth industrial revolution to create, let's say, fast-track growth for your country.
My commitment will be to add value. We'll be part of the Young Leaders Initiative.
Mrs. Merkel, Tony Blair, they were all, even President Putin, they were all young global leaders before. So if I take you, if I take Chancellor Kurz and the New Zealand Prime Minister, the three youngest leaders of governments are here.
And I have to say, when I mention now names like Mrs. Merkel, even Vladimir Putin and so on, they all have been young global leaders of the World Economic Forum. Mm-hmm. But what we are very proud of now is the young generation, like Prime Minister Trudeau, President of Argentina and so on, that we penetrate the cabinets. So yesterday I was at a reception for Prime Minister Trudeau, and I know that half of this cabinet, or even more, half of this cabinet are actually young global leaders of the World Economic Forum.
And that's true in Argentina too. Wow.
Yeah.
Sorry. That's true in Argentina as well.
It's true in Argentina, and it's true in France now. Mm-hmm. I mean, with the president, with a young global leader.
Question et commentaire, questions and comments. The honourable member for Oshawa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I listened to my colleague's speech. I had a constituent that wanted me to ask a question about outside interference to our democracy. Klaus Schwab is the head of the World Economic Forum, and he bragged how his subversive WEF, World Economic Forum, has quoted infiltrated governments around the world. He said that his organization had penetrated more than half of Canada's cabinet. And I was wondering, in the interest of transparency, could the member please name which cabinet ministers are on board with the WEF's agenda? My concern is the deputy.
Order. I know that the member was in a really good question there, but the audio is really bad and the video is really bad as well. And I apologize. I don't know if the member. Okay, let's try again. The honorable.
Russia is an important global power, and there's a long-standing tradition of Russia's participation in the World Economic Forum. At this moment in history, where the world has a unique and short window of opportunity to move from an age of confrontation to an age of cooperation, the ability to hear your voice, the voice of the President of the Russian Federation, is essential. Even and especially in times characterized by differences, disputes and protests, constructive and honest dialogue to address our common challenges is better than isolation and polarization. Yesterday, your phone exchange with President Biden and the agreement to extend the New START nuclear arms treaty in principle, I think, is a very promising sign in this direction. COVID-19, Mr. President, has shown our global vulnerability and interconnectivity. And like any other country, Russia will certainly also be affected, and your economic development and prospects for international cooperation, of course, is of interest to all of us. Mr. President, we are keen to hear from your perspective and from that of Russia how you see the situation developing in the third decade of the 21st century and what should be done to ensure that people everywhere find peace and prosperity. Mr. President, the world is waiting to hear from you.
Спасибо. Уважаемый господин Шваб, Mr. Schwab, dear colleagues, dear Klaus, I've visited Davos many times, assisting meetings starting from the 90s. Mr. Schwab just mentioned that we met each other first back in 1992 in St. Pete. And when I worked in St. Pete, I visited this forum many times. I'd like to thank you for this opportunity today for me to make my statement vis-a-vis the expert community which is participating in this forum, thanks to your efforts, Mr. Schwab. First of all, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome all World Economic Forum participants. And I'd like to start with the following. It's rather gratifying, in spite of the pandemics, it's rather gratifying to see that this year, despite of the restrictions caused by the coronavirus, the forum continues its work online. It has provided an opportunity for the participants to engage in an open and free discussion and share their evaluations and forecasts. And it partially makes up for the lack of direct communication between the leaders of states, global businesses, and the world community that has accumulated over the past months. All of this is important now that when we are facing with so many complex issues requiring solutions. This foray is the first foray in the third decade of the 21st century, and the majority of its topics are dedicated to the profound changes which are taking place in our planet, in the world. It is indeed hard to ignore the fundamental transformations in global economy, politics, social life, and technology. The coronavirus pandemic, which you mentioned before, has become a major challenge to the entire mankind, has just spurred or accelerated the structural changes, the preconditions for which have been already in place for many years. The pandemic has exacerbated the problems and imbalances that accumulated in the world earlier. We have every reason to believe that the tensions might aggravate even further, and such tendencies might emerge in almost every area. Naturally, there are no direct parallels in history, but some experts, however, and I do respect their opinion, they compare the current situation to the late 20s or early 30s of the last century. One may agree or disagree with such an opinion, yet one cannot but draw some parallel in terms of many aspects, the scale as well as the cross-cutting and systemic nature of challenges and potential threats. We see the crisis, we're witnessing the crisis of previous models and tools of economic development. Social stratification is increasing both globally and in individual countries. We mentioned this before, but today it causes a sharp polarization in public opinions. Populism, right and left-wing radicalism, and other extreme movements are on the rise. Domestic political processes, including in leading economies, are escalating and becoming more violent. All of this cannot but impact the nature of international relations, making them less stable and predictable. International institutions are weakening. Regional conflicts are multiplying. The global security system is degrading. And Klaus just mentioned my yesterday's phone talk with the US president, and we have agreed about the extending the START agreement. It's a correct step, but anyway, the contradictions are multiplying, and it is well known that in the 20th century, the failure and inability to essentially resolve such issues resulted in a catastrophic World War II. Of course, nowadays, such a heated conflict is not possible. I hope that it's not possible in principle, because it will mean the end of our civilization. But I would like to reiterate, however, that the situation might develop unpredictably and uncontrollably if we will sit on our hands doing nothing to avoid it. and there is a possibility that we may experience an actual collapse of global development that might result in a fight of all against all. The warring parties would attempt to tackle the escalated tensions by searching for internal and external enemies. The fight would mean the destruction of not only traditional values, and we cherish these values in Russia, such as family, but also fundamental freedoms, including the right of choice and privacy. I would like to note that social crisis and the crisis of values have already caused negative demographic consequences. As a result, the humankind risks losing the entire civilizations and cultures. Our common responsibility today is to avoid such a future that resembles a grim dystopia. We need to ensure development following a different path, one that is positive, balanced, and constructive. And in this regard, I would like to elaborate on the key challenges that, in my opinion, are facing the world community today. The first one of them is of the social and economic nature. Well, that's true. If we look at the statistics, despite the severe crises of 2008 and 2020, the past 40 years one can call extremely successful for the global economy. Starting from 1980, the global GDP at purchasing power parity in real terms per capita has doubled. And it's a positive sign. Globalization and domestic growth have resulted in a boost in developing countries.